Welcome to another episode of me designing and building furniture, and this time I got something really special for you. This was by far the most challenging, ambitious and meaningful projects I have done yet, and well, we will see in the end how it worked out. But let's start from the beginning and talk about why I built this daring elliptical dining table in the first place. My sister and her husband had been struggling for years to find a bigger apartment in Berlin. The housing market supply is down since years and it's one of the biggest problems of our city. So when they got the news that her co-worker's apartment would be available, it was like hitting the jackpot. For me, it was the perfect opportunity to finally build this elliptical dining table that I had on my mind month and month before. It needed to meet three main criteria. The table must be suitable for up to 8 people, fit perfectly in their new space, and most importantly, it has to be stunningly beautiful. So stick around until the end of the video to see if I managed to check all 3 boxes. There was a ton of milling to do, so I had to empty out the bucket of my dust collection every 30 minutes. I did the planing and jointing over 2 days though, because there was a lot of tension in the boards, so I could come back the day after and correct any minor warping or twisting. Well, working alone on these heavy boards was tough, but during the glue up the stress kicked in like it never did before, just because of lack of preparation and the pure size and weight of those things. I got a little help from the dominoes lining up the edges, but I had a lot to clean up later on. Let's talk about the design first. Why an elliptical tabletop? Well, there are 2 reasons. First, if well proportioned, it's one of the most beautiful geometrical forms out there because of its pure and simplistic elegance. Depending on the angle you're looking from, it can resemble anything from a sleek bullet to a sailboat. The second reason is actually very pragmatic. Compared to a rectangle, an elliptical shape has longer edge length due to the curve, which in theory allows more people to sit comfortably around the table. Plus, as a cool bonus, everyone can see each other, making it perfect for dining, conversations, card games, or exhausting emotional debates about politics. But what about that base, you might ask? Just like the ellipse as a design element, I fell deeply in love with a single base design. I played around with different forms and shapes and landed on this tapered octagonal base. To make it even more prominent, I decided to cover it with stone veneer. Stone what? Yep, it's made from slate and it looks like stone, it feels like stone, but is as easy to work with as acrylic or veneer. I'll drop a link in the description if you want to check it out. It's pretty cool stuff. To attach the tabletop to the base, I screwed a plywood mounting plate to the base, then connected it to the tabletop with machine screws from underneath. At the start, I told you that this was yet the most challenging, ambitious and meaningful projects to me. Meaningful because it's for my family, ambitious due to the design, and now we are getting to the challenging part, the making. In order to get a perfect elliptical shape, I asked a very handy and crafty friend for help. Elis works at a makerspace and with ease could cut out half of the ellipse with a CNC machine. And after cleaning up the top, I simply threw on the template and used the flush cut bit to trace the shape onto the tabletop. Afterwards, I came back with a big boy to finish it off. Seeing the ellipse in its final dimensions for the first time was a huge payoff for me. Until this moment, all the work was just the necessary job to be done. But now, after the big, challenging part, the ambition kicked in again. My sister and I talked about what kind of wood to use for the tabletop. I always was thinking ash or white oak, and well, apparently she did not. So she told me she wanted a black stained tabletop. Honestly, I wasn't sold on the idea first, but to be honest again, I think she was right about that choice. But you will see later. To keep the budget low, I bought some beech lumber from a guy in the suburbs of Berlin. He had taken down a whole beech tree 10 years ago and cut it up in slabs with his chainsaw. According to him, it took about 20 minutes cutting each slab and a full gas tank. He asked $70 for each slab, so that was quite the steal. Now I have to address the big elephant in the room. Whenever I talked with someone about this design, it didn't matter who I talked to, everyone told me that this hangover was way too long, that it would tip over, the whole table would be too unstable. And I thought, maybe they're right. But why not give it a shot anyway? If my design is a bit daring, it should be tested. Plus, proving the naysayers wrong would be an extra reward. After I gave the tabletop a little more lightness with a round over on the bottom edge, I faced my biggest fear of making this table, the tapered octagonal base. Two major problems had to be solved. One, I had to cut two angles at the same time on the table saw in order to line up the 8 pieces perfectly, and there was no room for errors after the cuts were made. And for this purpose I've built this jig where I could clamp the pieces in place and slowly sneak up on the right angle. And two, the stone veneer had to be glued on before the cuts were made to get perfect seams all around. So if I messed up, the veneer would be wasted too, and it's not cheap at all. I have to ask you for forgiveness because I didn't film the glue up of the base. To explain quickly, I just taped the 8 pieces edge to edge, applied glue to the seams, rolled the whole thing up and clamped it with more tape and ratchet straps. The angles naturally forced the pieces into place, and that's why this method gets you close to perfect mitres every time. Now, the unwrapping afterwards was so satisfying, and as you can see here, it turned out exactly as I had imagined. So, this was a second milestone during the build, and we are now coming to the last chapter, the finishing part. It may sound cliche, but just as I was editing this video I got really nostalgic because I've built this table in late summer 2024 and the autumn kicked off during the release of this video. All those recordings are documenting this building process but also the changing seasons, and seeing the summer was finally over is always depressing. But before we get too sentimental, let's get back to the project and talk a bit about the finishing process. To be honest, I usually don't like to admit that my sister was right and I was wrong, but this time I gotta say, staining the tabletop black was a great idea. Beforehand, I set it up to 240 grit with water popping the grain in between. This allows the grains to swell and raise. After the surface is dry to the touch, the raised grains sand back easily. It's like mowing the lawn on the tiny scale, and it's very crucial to do this step before staining because you don't want to sand off the stain later. Here it looks like it's going on well, but I had to come back again and again as the deeper pores were much harder to reach. For the stone veneer I used the finish that is recommended by the manufacturer. It is just water repellent and offers no strong mechanical protection. But as this is exclusively used as a table base, I don't see any reason to go crazy with the finish. And after the stain had dried up completely, I mixed up some Rubio monocoat. I did the first coat on the workshop, then got the table to my sister's and did the second and final coat there. We will see for how long the finish will be holding on, and I gotta say I'm a bit worried that the daily use will eventually wear through the Hartwig's oil and the stain, leaving ugly spots. I will keep you updated for sure. By the way, if you are enjoying this content, meaning this has value to you, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss upcoming projects like this one. But now, back to the finished dining table. As I mentioned at the start, building this dining table was a big challenge, but also a great opportunity for me to try to make something beautiful. And giving it to my sister and her husband and making them happy adds a lot of meaning to it, of course. Maybe one day I will see my future nephew or niece spilling their food on this table. But let's get back to my critics for a second and test if the design was actually too daring. Well, this speaks for itself, I guess.